So I'm fairly satisfied with my light for now. I'll make another pass at lighting a little bit later and really take a deeper dive into it and refine it, be a little bit more strategic about the placement of my lighting. I have this temporary environment. I'm not crazy about the black background now, but when I make my next lighting pass, I'll do some things to take control of that. What I want to focus on now is I want to add some details to my snowman. And the first detail I'm going to add is I want to stick an eyeball on my snowman. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to get started with another sphere object. Now, my sphere is way too big, obviously. But before I even resize it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift it straight up along the y-axis. I'm going to take the size of it way down, so maybe I'll drop it down to 10. That feels a little big right now, but I think for the sake of the presentation, it'll help me see this. Now, I want to kind of zoom in a little bit closer, and I could use the mouse wheel to zoom in, but I want to start sharing some quick keys with you. If you press the S key, S is in Sam, you can zoom right into an object that you have selected. So S is for selected. If I have any object selected, if I want to zoom on the hat, I can select the hat and tap the S key, and I'll zoom into it. I'll back my mouse out just a little bit. I'll grab the sphere, which is destined to be the snowman's eye, and I'm just holding down Option, and I'm clicking and dragging to orbit to get a better view of this. Now, I'm a little turned around here, and remember way back in an earlier presentation I mentioned that we want to kind of get back to the default Cinema 4D view if we get disoriented. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to orbit a little bit. And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to get the z-axis pointing back in space. I want the x-axis to run more or less right and left, and then make sure that the y-axis is running up. So now I'm oriented in my view, and I got a better sense of what's going on here. Now, I had mentioned before that y is the up and z, or the blue axis, is in the foreground background. And this isn't an arbitrary thing. This is Cinema 4D considers the z space the background and the negative z space to be the foreground. And so the arrow, the blue arrow, points back towards the background. And I'm just sliding this along the z space. Now I've moved it up according to the y, and I've moved it into the foreground according to the z. And I'll move it back down just a little bit, and I'll move it back towards the snowman. You can see how easy it is to kind of get disoriented in this space. But I know because I moved it up and I moved it into the foreground, it looks more like a nose right now because of its placement and because of the lack of context. But if I move that up a little bit, I'm going to take the time to make that a little bit smaller. I'll take that down to about 6 centimeters at the scale I'm working at. Now, if I look at a nice flat front view of my snowman, remember, I want this to be an eyeball. I don't want my snowman to be a cyclops, so I'm going to need to make 2 of these, but I just wanted to kind of get it positioned on the front of his face so that I got a sense of what this is going to look like. And so remember, I just move this up along the y-axis, and then forward and backward along the z-axis. And as this disappears, I can see that I'm moving it back into the snowman. So I'll just kind of move it back until it pops out. Now, if I look at my coordinate system, I know that I moved it up, and so there's a y value here, and I know that I moved it into the foreground, and the foreground is in the negative z space. And again, this is not an arbitrary thing. If I go up here into the top right-hand corner, we talked about panning around, and we talked about dollying, and we talked about orbiting. To the icon just to the right of the orbit icon is the split view. And if I click on that icon, this takes me out into the 4-screen view, or the multiple viewports. This is my perspective view. This is the window I've been working in this entire time. I can look at Cinema 4D from a top-down view or a front view, and I can tell because there's a little label in the corner of this viewport that tells me what view I'm looking at. And by default, all the other viewports are showing in this wireframe render mode. So it's a real quick, efficient mode. And you can see that if I look at the right side of the snowman, I can see that the eyeball is kind of like, out in this direction, which means that in my perspective viewport, let me just try to orbit here. This is my right view. Okay, this is my front view in the perspective viewport. And then, of course, if I orbit it around, I can see the back view. Same thing here. The top, I'm looking at a top-down view. The split viewport is really nice because it can give you really precise control over over your models, as long as you model things in the proper orientation. So all that time I was saying that the Z is the front viewport. Well, if I just arbitrarily chose X as the front viewport, then when I look at the front side or the right side, things would be kind of all over the place. So I want to make sure that my orientation and I want to expand the perspective viewport, and I can do that by clicking on the same icon I used to split the viewport. You'll notice that when you go into the split viewport scene or arrangement, you can see that each one of these viewports has its own set of controls here. And if I want to maximize one of these viewports, I just click on the icon in the top right-hand corner of the viewport. If I click on it again, it splits out the viewport. I want to maximize my perspective view and take a look and see what I'm doing here. So if I want a lot of control, and in the near future we're going to try to gain some control, we want to split our viewport. I can also split the viewport once I start getting a sense of space. And if I look in the front viewport, I'll take a closer look here. I'm just zooming in with the mouse wheel. I get a lot of information. I can see that if I'm looking at the front viewport, I can tell that my eye is directly in the center of the snowman. I can also see exactly how much overlap there is between the middle sphere and the top sphere. So I can get a lot of information by looking through this viewport. If I don't want to look at just the wireframe view, I can always go up under the display pull-down menu and change it from lines to something like constant shading with lines, or I could go all the way up to quick shading with lines, and so on. So this is kind of a continuum of the level of detail. Lines is the lowest, and this Gerard shading is the highest level. So we can, whenever I'm looking through a flat viewport, I really like to see both the like a quick shade view with lines. I like to look at it with lines. It shows me the geometry that I have inside my object. So I'm looking at the front viewport. I can tell that my eye is right in the center. What I'll do is I'll just move it over. And I'm not too concerned about the exact placement of it, but I'll just kind of nudge it over. Now I have one eye that's in position. While I'm doing this, I might as well call my object eye. Now, I'm going to Command C and Command V to copy and paste, and now I have a second eye. Now that eye has been pasted exactly in the same coordinates as the original eye. Now remember, we're modeling in 3 dimensions here, and I've moved the eyeball up along the y-axis, and I don't want to change that anymore because I want symmetry in these eyes. We moved it into the foreground by grabbing the object and moving it along the blue axes. Okay, now the position of the left and right eye are going to have the same Z value because we want it on the front of the snowman. So moving it into the foreground will establish that front position. So we've moved it up and we've moved it into the foreground. Now the only thing that's going to be different from the placement of one eye to the next is how far over on the x-axis it is. So if I pull this eyeball over, I could just eyeball this and say, oh yeah, that looks pretty good. There's symmetry there. Let me undo, Command Z. So I still have the copy selected. If I go down into my X coordinate, the original eyeball I moved over off the y-axis by roughly negative 18 centimeters. Well, if I just invert that value and I take off the minus, so in other words, from the center point, I'm going to move this new eyeball over 18 centimeters to the right. When I hit apply, or I hit return, that'll give me exact symmetry, okay? Because when I moved the eyeball over on the x-axis, it always measures everything from 0x, 0y, and 0z. So in other words, let me just reorient my view here. Whenever I create an object, in this case like this cube, if I move it over, I know when I create it, it's created at 0, 0, 0. If I move it off to one side and I change the x value, okay, I'll make another cube. I can take this value of x, in this case it's minus 389, but if I just copy, I'll leave the negative off of there and I'll paste in this value. I've just moved that cube over and there's complete symmetry within this scene. Okay, because everything is measured off the origin of this 3D space. So now I have these 2 eyeballs kind of stuck on there, and I'm going to flatten out my view and look at this from a straighter on view, and I'm just going to tuck in the eyes a little bit closer And I'll make a note here. I'll just round off this value instead of negative 15 point whatever. I'll just take off the leftover there, the remainder. I'll grab my other eye, and you can see I'm trying to sneak in and select that eye, and I can't quite grab it. And in fact, every time I try to click on it, I am actually nudging my good eye over here. So let me just key back in that value of 15. All the more reason I should be using the object manager in order to make my selections. So I'll change this X value to 15. I'll tap the S key to zoom in, and now I'm going to roll out with my mouse wheel. I feel like my eyeballs are sticking out too far of the snowman, so I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to select eyeball 1 and shift-click eyeball, or eye, and I'll just move those back into space. So I see them sinking into that snowman. And I think that's pretty good. So I could group those and call those eyes. In the next presentation, I'll start thinking about how to add a carrot for a nose, and we'll get into some basic modeling strategies, but we'll do that in the next presentation.